Welcome to another episode of Game Design Notes. Last time we talked about creating Star Wars content for ICRPG. We had a little bit of a working session, and we talked about items and lightsabers and the dynamic force dice kind of idea. And like I said, this is just kind of a working session to go through the process of design kind of out loud together, and just practice and see what we can come up with. So this episode is going to be again focused on that same thing, but we're going to actually get into the force powers and kind of bending the language, or how would you write powers for ICRPG, spells for ICRPG, and make them feel like they're just a part of the game originally. So this kind of goes along with that idea of when you're learning game design, practice, build content for other games, and just go with stuff that you know that you're interested in, and do that for practice. So let's get started. So last time we talked about the dynamic force dice, so I'm just gonna briefly review that quick, and then we'll jump into the power. So force dice is a d4 that you get when you learn a force power. You set it to 4. Every time you use a force power, you decrease it by 1, and that basically lets you use your force power. And then when you're at 1, you're kind of exhausted, you're out of doing it the force. All of your force, you can still use your force powers, but any checks that you have to make are hard. So it just kind of shows that exhaustion piece of it. So you can keep casting, but it just gets more difficult if you keep doing the same thing. So that being said, there's a couple things that we could drive off of that. We could have items that increase your force dice from a d4 to a d6 to a d8, d10, d12, whatever. And we also have abilities that, passive abilities or even active abilities that could trigger off of a threshold with your force dice. So you could have a saber combat, passive bonus that says when your force dice is 3 or higher, then you get +2 to all of your attempts with lightsabers, or +2 to damage with lightsabers, or something of that effect. Or maybe it increases your armor, it increases your defense, your flow in the force, and your agility to dodge, etc. Things like that. So those are possible abilities that can just trigger off of this number that we have. And we can also do things like we can use the resource in situations where it's maybe not our turn, such as trying to deflect a bolt, a blaster bolt or something. So getting into it, let's talk about some of the basic powers, like force push, force pull. How do you word these, and how would you make these? So the format in the book for spells is, it's got the name of the spell, and it's got the characteristic, or the stat that it goes to, so intelligence or wisdom, and then it has an effort value, or it has a difficulty to learn. So when you're trying to learn this ability, you have to roll better than this target number, essentially, and then you can put effort into learning the spell, and then you have that effort as a number of hearts required in order to learn. And then you have the description of whatever it does. So force pull would probably be more on the easier side of things, so probably a 12-13 difficulty, and probably just 1 effort, I would say, required to learn it. And pretty simple ability. I would say that the description would be, what did you say? Force push. Push a target, a near target, so a target within near range. Push them far. Push a near target far. That's a pretty easy one, right? So if somebody's up close to you, you just bam, force. You have to. It would be a wisdom check. So it'd be a whiz power, wisdom check, or whatever, however that's worded, and then you'd say push a near target far. So if they're near, you use a force point, you Do your check. If you succeed, you push them far and just away from you, essentially. So that's kind of that base part. So now let's try force pull. So this is, essentially just the opposite, but the language gets a little weird here. So same idea, force pull, probably a 12 to 13 difficulty, 1 effort to learn. Wisdom, power, could be intelligence, I guess, with either of these, since they're kind of attack related. I would say pull a target you can see far distance. This is where it's hard, because it's like pull a far target near, but near could be near from just where they're at currently, so 1 banana's length, or near as in near to you. So I guess I would word it as pull a far target, or pull a target you can see up to far distance towards you. So I guess to any point near you. This is kind of a hard one to do. One that I think is kind of cool is Jedi Mind Trick. I think this would be a really fun one to have, especially for your deceptive characters. And I would just say with this, it's maybe a little bit more difficult, 14, maybe a 13, 14 range. 1 or 2 effort required to learn it. And basically you would do a wisdom check. There'd be a wisdom check when intimidating, convincing, or deceiving. And then you roll magical effort instead of like your basic effort that you would roll to try and convince somebody to do something. So you're using that extra magical power of the Force to influence them, and you're not using your charisma, you're actually using your wisdom, so your insight. You're really getting in their head, and you're not necessarily charismatic, because you don't have to be. You're just brute forcing your way with the Force to convince them of something. I think that's an interesting one. You got things like deflect, where this is another tough one. Should it be a check? Is it something that happens on your turn? Is it something that happens on the when you're being attacked? So let's just go over a couple of options for this. Deflect, I'm going to leave off the difficulty to learn and the effort required to learn it for now, just because it's just kind of a guess at this point, and I think more testing would be required to really know, and at some point it probably doesn't really matter how difficult it is to learn. Deflect, couple ways you can look at this. This could be a wisdom check. I think it makes sense as a wisdom check, because it's your intuition, your perception, essentially. And you've heightened your perception enough that you can deflect a blaster bolt at a target. So first way you can look at this is on your turn, you make this wisdom check to do like a deflect move, or like a defensive stance move, essentially. And you're focusing on deflecting bolts to defend yourself, or somebody nearby you. So if your check succeeds, then for the next, say, 1d4 rounds, you get this benefit. And so this is kind of like, you do it on your turn, but it might last for a couple turns. Okay? And I've seen that in ICRPG with other spells. Last for a couple turns, and then it would be something to the effect of, +2 armor is kind of your ability to deflect. Your armor goes up, and if a blaster shot misses you, or attack with a blaster misses you, deflect it at a target. I think that's all I would say for the spell description. I think in game the mechanics would be, okay, so I can deflect this at a target. What does that, what does it mean to deflect at a target? I would say you have to make a ranged attack roll and then the damage is just whatever the original weapon was. So you can your from the deflection, your defense goes up, but in order to actually hit a target by deflecting, you actually have to make another attack roll, or you make an attack roll, and then the damage is just equal to whatever the original one was. So it's not like a guaranteed, like, aha, I just automatically hit you back. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But you still get that benefit of having extra defense while you're in this like defensive stance. The other way that you could look at this is having it be more of a passive ability that you can just activate when you're attacked. So instead of taking your turn to like prepare your defense, you could have it say, and then having it last a number of turns, you could have it say, when you're attacked, so it's just deflect, when you're attacked, spend a force point, so tick your force dice down, as long as it's not at 1, as long as you're able to do that, then for this attack you get +2 defense, or +2 armor, and if an attack with a bolt misses you, then you deflect it at a target. So in this situation, you don't have to spend your action, actively trying to deflect stuff, but you do have to still spend. It's less efficient. It's more action efficient because you don't have to use your action, but it's less force point efficient because now every single attack, if you want to try and deflect it, you've got to spend a force point. Well, before it was, I spend a force point, and any attacks on me for the next 1d4 rounds, I get this benefit. And now it's just a single attack, or maybe it's a single turn. Maybe it's when you're attacked, spend it, you get it for the rest of the round, or until the start of your next turn, essentially. But it's still a 1 point per turn, but it's not costing your action anymore, or one point per round. Sorry. So it's an interesting one, and then you also have to make an attack roll in order to deal damage with it. Just an interesting one that would give a force user the ability to have something else to spend their force points on, and say, I might want to save these because I could be deflecting shots. Reminds me of the monk from D&D using their key points to get the dodge bonus action. One of the other things to think about here, and I just lost it. I had it on the tip of my tongue and I lost it. All right, well, I'm going to move on. Maybe I'll think of it. Another ability that would be interesting with force users would be, we'll get to like force lightning and stuff, but psychometry or psychometry. I'm not sure. I'm sure it's psychometry. I've seen this on the wiki. You've kind of seen people do this in the movies. Is with psychometry is where you like touch an object, and the force user is able to determine past events that this object has, been through, or past people who have owned the object or came into contact with the object. Or a lot of times in movies, I guess I think back to The Force Awakens. It kind of what happens when Rey, it's kind of similar. Rey touches Luke's lightsaber, and what happens is she has like this vision, and she can like see. This is kind of different. She just has like this weird vision that happens, but essentially, kind of that same concept. You touch an object and you focus on that object with the Force, and you're able to understand events, like past events that have happened. So, let's say it was that lightsaber, and Rey touched it, and she used this psychometry ability on it. If she puts enough effort into it, she would maybe see how that lightsaber ended up where it was. She might see a vision of Maz, taking it from somebody. Maybe she can see who that is, maybe she can't, and putting it in this box. Or, some event, some battle that this lightsaber was in and used against, the stormtroopers on the Death Star or whatever. Things like that, where you could have some important object, maybe a crown. Well, this is Star Wars the end. Some artifact, some object. Maybe it's an entire ship. Maybe it's a person, and you're just trying to get information about that object and events that have happened around that object. It would be a very interesting way to include story hooks, is allowing a character to get extra information out of inanimate objects, and almost seeing it as a flashback from the perspective of that object, and what the object has been through. And so the way that would work to me would be, if you're touching an object, you can cast this, be a wisdom power, and then you do magical effort, and every 10 effort that you get, so every heart of effort that you generate while touching this object through the psychometry spell or power, gives you information about a single event or a single person that this has come into contact with. So you could potentially sit and just keep trying to figure out what's up with this object and learning more and more and more about this object and what the object has been through. Is that going to benefit you in your game? Maybe, maybe not, but it's just an interesting way to get information into the story. Force lightning, force choking. Let's talk about force lightning. I think this is a fun one. I would have this be kind of an area effect attack, and say it's just a lightning spell, but I'd say up to three targets in near range. You basically make either have them make a save or just do an attack, and everybody has the same armor, so in ICRPG, so that really doesn't matter. So I'd say you make an attack on one. And then it also hits 2 people that are within near range to the original target, and it just does magical damage, so you just straight up hitting them up to 3 people with lightning. And then force choking is an interesting one, because this kind of goes along the lines of weapons, right? All the weapons do the same damage. They all have the same damage dice. So how do you switch between, force lightning does the same amount of damage as force choking. It does magical damage because it's a magical attack. I guess the way that I would say here is just in terms of its usage. So force lightning near up to 3 targets potentially, whereas force choking would be still magical damage, but it would be anybody that you can see. So there's no range. If you can see them, even if it's over a holo projector, over a screen, a video, whatever, if you can see them and have communication with them, you can use this power on them to do magical damage to them. But it's a single target, but it's anybody that you can see. That's how I would run that. Similarly, to that would be like force grip, allows you to hold on to somebody or some object. Same thing, I would say. It's just straight up. If you can see them, you can influence them. So let's see, what other abilities? There's a force crush, which is kind of like a force choke, except you're holding on to them and smashing them, and it's just really a different way to look at the same. It's really the same ability. It's just instead of suffocating them, you're just trying to smash them under the weight of the force. So that's a number of abilities that we've seen. Agility, I would say, is another one, or jumping. Force users seem to have an incredible ability to move around quickly. So agility, again, kind of like deflect. I think you could have it be spend a force point and you can move near for free. You don't have to take an action, you don't have to take a move, you don't have to use your move up. I spent a force point, I can move near, and now I can just continue on with my life. I can spend another force point, I can move near again, and just fly all over the battlefield until I'm out of points to spend. So I think that's one way you could run it. That's the main way I would run agility. Jump could kind of, again, go the same way. You could say, all right, spend a force point, your jump height and distance is, probably mainly your height. Your jump height is tripled for the rest of the turn. and maybe jump anytime you have to do a check to jump. It's easy. Or you could do it. There's a frog leap spell in ICRPG that you could just straight up copy, which is, I think it's a wisdom check, and then for 1d4 rounds, whenever you have to make a jump check, if other people have to make a jump check or save, you don't have to do it. You just automatically succeed. So you could just straight up copy that, or just say your jump height is tripled for 1d4 rounds, instead of just for free, or spend a force point and then you just get it. You actually have to make a check to do it. So then that's just a couple of the force powers and ideas that I've had there. ICRPG has a couple ways that you can manage having spells in your inventory and how that works. Because of the inventory system in ICRPG, you have 10. You can carry 10 items, and you can have 10 items equipped. And there's one version of spellcasting where your spells don't take up inventory slots, but they have the potential to backfire on you if you critically fail. There's one where they do take up slots, and they just don't fail ever. And there's one where they don't take up slots, but they consume. You have to have a power source to power them, and that you deplete over time. So until you get more of that power source of crystals, I think you can't cast spells anymore. So how does that work? I think that it makes sense in this with the force powers is to make them be equipped powers. So you might have your lightsaber equipped, you might have like a Jedi robe equipped, and you might have like force push, force pull, and Jedi mind trick equipped. So that's five or six things that you've got equipped that are taking up essentially space. And the reasoning I have behind this is I would say that they don't take up carry space. Your force powers don't take up carry space, so you can know as many as you want, but you can only have so many equipped. And the idea there is having them equipped is essentially your ability to concentrate on them. It's like having a spell prepared in D&D. Your wizard knows all of the spells on the list, but he only has so many prepared that day. So whatever you have equipped, you have is what you have prepared. That's what you can actively cast. You might know Jedi mind trick, but if you're not going to be in a situation where you think you'll need it, you might opt to switch that out for something else, and then maybe it takes an action to switch out a number of your powers. But then that makes it so a little bit would limit the power. If you want to have a ton of force powers, you can, but you can't have tons of armor then, or you can't have like a bunch of weapons. So I think that would kind of help prevent force users from being like, well, I have all these force powers and I have full body armor, laminate armor, and I've got a lightsaber, and I've got 2 blaster pistols and a shock rifle and all this stuff. So I think that's how I would handle it. You have to equip powers in order to use them, but they don't take up carry space, essentially, if you know them. So that's what I have for kind of this second working session. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and share this with your friends, and I will catch you guys in the next video.